There is a curious thing that happens when logical people encounter the subject of manifestation. They resist it not because they lack imagination, but because they possess too much respect for cause and effect. They have been trained to see the world as a machine that responds to force, to action, to effort. Push here and something moves there. Work hard and results follow. This is the framework through which they interpret everything, and it has served them well in many areas of life. But there is a deeper logic they have not yet considered. It is not the logic of the external world, but the logic of experience itself. And once this logic is understood, manifestation stops being a mystical idea and becomes something far more inevitable than they ever imagined. The mistake most logical thinkers make is assuming that because something cannot be measured with instruments, it cannot be real. But experience is real. You do not doubt that you feel happy or sad. You do not question whether you are anxious or calm. These states are not visible under a microscope, yet they shape every moment of your life. What most people fail to realize is that these inner states are not reactions to the world, they are assumptions about the world. And life, in its perfect and impersonal way, reflects assumptions back to you with absolute consistency. This is not magic, this is structure. It is the architecture of experience, and it operates whether you believe in it or not. When you assume something is true, you do not wait for evidence. You do not hope for confirmation. You simply live from the quiet certainty that it is so. This is not a state of wishing or wanting. It is a state of being. And the world, which is far more fluid than it appears, arranges itself around what you are being, not around what you are doing. Not around what you are saying, but around what you are assuming to be true about yourself and your life. This is why effort without assumption leads nowhere. You can work tirelessly toward a goal while silently believing it will not happen, and your belief will win every time. Not because belief is magical, but because belief determines what you accept as real. And what you accept as real becomes the lens through which you interpret everything that happens. Most people live in a state of wanting. They look at their lives and see what is missing. They feel the gap between where they are and where they wish to be, and they spend their energy trying to close that gap through action. But action taken from a state of lack only reinforces the lack. It is not the action itself that is the problem. It is the inner position from which the action is taken. When you act as though you do not yet have something, you are assuming its absence. And life mirrors that assumption back to you in 1,000 subtle ways. Opportunities pass by unnoticed. Conversations go nowhere. Doors that should open remain closed, not because the universe is against you, but because you are against yourself. You are standing in the identity of someone who does not have, and so you continue to experience not having. The shift happens when you stop trying to get something and start living as though it is already yours. This does not mean pretending. It does not mean lying to yourself or ignoring reality. It means recognizing that reality is not fixed. What you call reality is simply the outer reflection of an inner state that has been held long enough to harden into form. And if it hardened once, it can harden again into something new. But the new form cannot come from the old state. You cannot think the thoughts of lack and expect abundance. You cannot feel unworthy and expect to be treated with worth. Life does not reward effort, it rewards alignment. And alignment is nothing more than the agreement between your inner assumption and your outer experience. This is where logical thinkers often stumble. They want proof before they believe. They want to see the evidence before they accept the conclusion. But life does not work in that order. Life works from the inside out, not from the outside in. You do not see something and then believe it. You believe it and then you see it. This is not a reversal of logic. It is the restoration of logic to its proper place. Because believing is not about convincing yourself of something false. It is about recognizing what is true in a realm that exists before the physical. It is about occupying the state that corresponds to the life you wish to live and allowing that state to express itself naturally through you. When you assume you are something, you do not announce it, you do not defend it, you do not try to prove it to others. You simply live from it. And living from it means that your thoughts, your feelings, your choices, and your interpretations all flow from that assumption without effort. If you assume you are successful, you do not worry about success. You do not chase it or fear losing it. You simply move through life as someone for whom success is natural. And because you are moving from that state, you make decisions differently. You speak differently. You respond to setbacks differently. Not because you are pretending, but because your inner agreement has changed. And when your inner agreement changes, your outer world has no choice but to follow. This is not about controlling circumstances. It is about becoming the kind of person to whom those circumstances belong. There is a version of you that already has what you want. Not in the future, not in some distant possibility, but now, in the invisible realm of potential where all versions of you exist simultaneously. The question is not whether that version exists. The question is whether you are willing to occupy it. And occupying it does not require effort. It requires release. It requires letting go of the identity you have been clinging to, the one that says you are lacking, struggling, waiting, hoping. That identity feels familiar, and so it feels true. But familiarity is not truth. It is only repetition, and repetition can be changed. The reason most people fail at manifestation is not because they lack desire. It is because they lack the willingness to let go of who they have been. They want the new life, but they want to bring the old self along for the ride, and it does not work that way. The old self is the one who created the old life. If you remain that self, you will continue to create that life, no matter how many affirmations you repeat or vision boards you make. Affirmations are useless if they are spoken from a state of lack. Vision boards are useless if you look at them with longing, because longing is the feeling of not having, and not having is an assumption, and assumptions become experience. So the work is not in doing more. The work is in being different. And being different begins with a simple question. Who would I be if I already had what I want? Not what would I do, not what would I say, but who would I be? What would I assume about myself? How would I move through the world? What thoughts would feel natural to me? What feelings would be my baseline? This is not a visualization exercise. This is an identity shift. And identity is not something you create. It is something you choose. You choose it by withdrawing your attention from the old story and placing it on the new one. Not once, not twice, but consistently, until the new story feels more real than the old one. This is where patience comes in, but not the patience of waiting, the patience of knowing. When you know something is yours, you do not check for it every day. You do not worry about when it will arrive. You simply live as though it is already handled. This is the state of fulfillment, and fulfillment is not something you achieve after you get what you want. Fulfillment is the state that brings what you want into your life, because fulfillment is the feeling of having, and having is an assumption, and assumptions harden into facts. Most people reverse this. They think they will feel fulfilled once they have the thing, but the thing only comes to those who already feel fulfilled. This seems paradoxical to the logical mind, but it is perfectly consistent with the way experience works. You do not attract what you want, you attract what you are. And what you are is determined by what you assume. If you assume you are someone who struggles, you will find struggle. If you assume you are someone who is supported, you will find support. Not because the world is different, but because you are different. And being different changes everything. There is no need to force this. There is no need to try hard or push or effort your way into a new state. In fact, effort is often the sign that you are still operating from the old assumption, because when you truly assume something, it feels natural. It feels obvious. It feels like who you have always been. This is the goal. Not to become someone new, but to return to the version of yourself that has always existed beneath the layers of doubt and fear and conditioning. That version is not uncertain. That version does not wonder if it is possible. That version simply is. And as you occupy that version more and more consistently, the outer world begins to shift. Not because you are manipulating it, but because the outer world has always been a reflection of the inner one. This is not a metaphor. This is the literal structure of experience. You do not see the world as it is, you see the world as you are. And as you are changes, so does what you see. Opportunities appear that were always there, but invisible to you. People respond to you differently, not because they have changed, but because you have. Circumstances align in ways that seem coincidental, but are actually inevitable, because they are matching the frequency of your inner state. This is why action without assumption is exhausting. You are trying to move a world that is only a mirror. And you cannot change a mirror by touching its surface. You could only change it by changing what stands in front of it. You are what stands in front of the mirror, and when you change, the reflection changes. Not someday, not eventually, but immediately, though the evidence may take time to reach your senses. This is the gap that confuses most people. They shift their inner state, but they expect the outer world to shift instantly. And when it does not, they assume they did something wrong. But the outer world is always delayed. It is always catching up to what you have already become. The delay is not a sign of failure. It is simply the nature of physical reality. The inner world moves at the speed of thought. The outer world moves at the speed of time. But time is not an obstacle. It is a grace. It gives you the opportunity to stabilize in your new assumption before it hardens into form. Because if every fleeting thought became instant reality, life would be chaos. The delay allows you to practice being the person you have chosen to be until that way of being becomes automatic, until it becomes who you are, not who you're trying to be. This is where most people falter. They shift their state for a day, maybe a week, and then they look around and see that nothing has changed. And because nothing has changed on the outside, they conclude that nothing is working, so they return to the old state. They return to doubt, to frustration, to the identity of someone who is still waiting. And in doing so, they erase the progress they made. Not because the universe punished them, but because they reassumed the old condition. And life, which is always faithful to assumption, reflected that condition back to them. The outer world did not fail them. They failed to remain faithful to the inner shift. Faithfulness is not about blind belief. It is about inner consistency. It is about occupying the same state today that you occupied yesterday and the day before that, until it becomes so natural that you forget you were doing it. This is when manifestation occurs, not when you are trying to manifest, not when you are checking for signs or looking for proof, but when you have forgotten to look, because you are simply living as the person who already has. This forgetting is not carelessness, it is mastery. It is the sign that assumption has become identity. And identity does not need evidence. It simply is. The logical mind resists this because it wants guarantees. It wants to know that if it does this, then that will happen. But life does not offer guarantees in the way the logical mind wants them. Life offers something far more reliable. It offers perfect reflection. It offers absolute consistency between inner state and outer experience. But the consistency is not immediate, it is cumulative. Every moment you spend in the new state is a seed planted, and seeds do not become trees overnight. They require time, and they require that you stop digging them up to check if they are growing. You plant the seed by assuming the state. You water it by returning to that state again and again, and you allow it to grow by leaving it alone, by trusting that the process is unfolding even when you cannot see it. This is not passivity. This is alignment. Passivity says, I will do nothing and hope for the best. Alignment says, I will be the version of myself to whom this outcome belongs, and I will allow my actions to flow from that version naturally. There is a difference. Passivity is rooted in fear and inaction. Alignment is rooted in certainty and inspired movement. When you are aligned, you do not force action. You do not create elaborate plans out of anxiety. You simply move when movement feels natural, and you rest when rest feels natural. And the movement that comes from alignment is always effortless, because it is not you trying to make something happen. It is life moving through you in response to what you have become. This is the part that logical thinkers often find hardest to accept. They have been taught that results require effort, that nothing comes without hard work, that struggle is the price of success. And in the old framework, this was true. But the old framework was built on the assumption that you are separate from what you want, that life is indifferent to you, that you must fight for every inch of ground. And if you assume those things, they will be true for you. But they are not universally true. They are only true within the confines of that assumption. Step outside that assumption, and a different set of rules applies. In the new framework, life is not indifferent. Life is responsive. It is not waiting to see what you will do. It is waiting to see what you will be. And what you will be is determined by what you assume. So the question is not, how do I make this happen? The question is, who am I choosing to be right now, in this moment, regardless of what I see around me? This choice is always available. It does not require permission. It does not require perfect circumstances. It only requires that you stop defending your current state and step into a new one. Defending your current state is something most people do without realizing it. They tell the same stories about themselves over and over. They rehearse their limitations. They justify why things are the way they are. And every time they do this, they recreate the same reality. Not because the reality is fixed, but because they keep re-choosing it. They keep standing in the same inner position, and so they keep seeing the same outer reflection. And then they wonder why nothing changes. But nothing changes because they have not changed. And they have not changed because they are still committed to the old story, even as they claim to want a new one. The new story does not begin with what you say. It begins with what you assume. And what you assume is revealed not by your words, but by your inner reactions. When something happens, what is your first thought? When you imagine the future, what do you expect? When you think about yourself, what do you believe? These are the places where your true assumptions live. And if your true assumptions are still rooted in lack, in unworthiness, in fear, then those are the assumptions that will continue to create your experience. No amount of external action will override them, because external action is always secondary to internal state. This is why so many people work hard and achieve nothing, while others seem to succeed with ease. It is not about talent. It is not about luck. It is not about who you know or where you were born. It is about assumption. The person who assumes success moves through life differently than the person who assumes struggle. They interpret the same events differently. They respond to the same challenges differently. They make different choices, not because they are smarter, but because they are standing in a different inner position. And from that position, different paths become visible. Doors open that were always there but unnoticed. Opportunities arise that were always possible but unrecognized. Not because the world changed, but because the person changed. And this is the great secret that logical thinkers need to hear. You are not trying to change the world. You are trying to change yourself. And when you change yourself, the world has no choice but to change around you. Because the world you experience is not objective. It is personal. It is the reflection of your inner state, filtered through your assumptions, projected onto the screen of physical reality. And the screen is neutral. It does not care what you project onto it. It simply reflects back what you give it. Give it fear, and it shows you things to fear. Give it certainty, and it shows you confirmation of that certainty. Give it the assumption that you are someone to whom good things happen, and good things will happen. Not because you earned them, not because you deserved them, but because that is the nature of reflection. There is no morality in this. There is no judgment. Life does not ask if you are good enough before it responds to your assumption. It simply responds. This is why bad people sometimes have good lives, and good people sometimes suffer. It is not about virtue, it is about assumption. An assumption is available to everyone, regardless of their past, their circumstances, or their worthiness. You do not need to become a better person to have a better life. You only need to assume you are the kind of person to whom that life belongs. And in assuming it, you become it. Not someday, now. This is the immediacy that most people miss. They think change takes time, that they need to slowly build toward a new identity, that they must earn the right to feel differently about themselves. But identity is not built, it is chosen, and it can be chosen in an instant. The moment you decide you are no longer the person who struggles, you are no longer that person. The moment you decide you are the person who has, you are that person. Not in the future, not after you prove it, but now, in the realm where all things exist before they become physical. And if you can remain in that decision, if you can live from that identity consistently, the physical world will have no choice but to conform. This is not positive thinking. Positive thinking is trying to cover up negative assumptions with cheerful thoughts. This is identity shift. This is becoming, at the level of being, the person who already has what you want. And the difference between the two is vast. Positive thinking says, I hope this works. Identity shift says, this is who I am. Positive thinking is fragile, easily shaken by circumstances. Identity shift is stable because it is not dependent on circumstances. It is the ground from which circumstances arise. When you understand this, manifestation stops being something you do and becomes something you are. You are not trying to manifest, you are simply living as the version of yourself that already has. And in living that way, the having becomes inevitable. Not because you forced it, not because you worked for it, but because you aligned with it. And alignment is the only force that matters. Alignment is the magnet that draws your inner state into outer form. And the magnet is always on. It is always pulling. The only question is what you are aligned with.